he has chosen to wear no name on the back of his jersey to show that he's no different than any other person, regardless of his celebrity status. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think it's somewhat brilliant, to be quite honest with you, because if you really listen to what he had to say, when you had supporters of Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam back in the day and what have you, and you used the word X, that's what X symbolized, because you know what, you didn't feel like you were a part of this nation, that you were treated appropriately, and as a result, you used the X to symbolize essentially how non-existent you were in the eyes of white America and beyond. And so Jimmy Butler, in a roundabout way, is going about the business of saying just that he shouldn't be more special than anybody else, but they shouldn't be less special because they're not a multimillionaire, an athlete, a rap artist, or whatever the case may be, generating a lot of revenue for themselves and somebody else, that we're all equal in the eyes of God, and that we should have that kind of mentality, and more importantly, from a societal perspective, all of us should be treated that way. So I definitely get where he's coming from. I understand it. I think it's brilliant on his part, but I would like to add this. There are words that could be used that are incredibly, incredibly powerful. When we think about LeBron, I applauded him the other day, and I still applaud him right now and stand with him in terms of his rationale and reasoning behind why he was just going to leave his name. And according to what I've been told, there was no truth to the reports that he wanted specifically something along those, something on the back of his jersey, and the NBA wouldn't allow it, so he said to hell with it. I was told that wasn't true. But nevertheless, let's just speak hypothetically for a second and imagine if it were true that LeBron wanted to put more than a vote on the back of his jersey. I think that's something that the NBA should have allowed him to do. Now, obviously, they're working in concert with the Players Association, so it's not like the NBA definitively says no and the Players Association has to bow down. The Players Association is negotiating and has negotiated with the NBA in order to make these things happen, and they want to be proactive. Max, I was told that there were people that actually wanted to have the words F Trump on the back of their jersey, for crying out loud. There was at least one person that said something like that. Now, obviously, that's very, very inappropriate to have on the back of your jersey, particularly when games are being nationally televised. But that's how juvenile some people could be. Not all, not most, not even some, but the rare few. You can't do something like that. It's just counterproductive to the overall cause, particularly when you have advertisers and sponsors that you have to work with, for crying out loud, because they got to think about their bottom lines as well. But I do believe the word vote on the back of LeBron James' jersey would have been very profound. And I emphasize his jersey, not just because of his movement more than a vote, but also because of who he is. Who's the camera going to be on more than LeBron James? Nobody's going to have the camera on them more than LeBron James over the next couple of months while they're playing basketball. And if you saw the word vote and you consider the fact that the NBA season is scheduled to end in mid-October and the election is November 3rd, excuse me, I think that could have gone a long way, and I would have liked to have seen the word vote on the back of LeBron James' jersey, although I understand his reasoning and I totally support him.
I love the idea of LeBron wearing vote. I think it's a great idea. And I'm sure you were adding kind of interpretation to the X. But just to go back to the Nation of Islam, yes. The idea of the X, like Malcolm X, is because it was the rejection of the slave name, which was passed down, which is why African Americans did not have African names, but had European names. So like Muhammad Ali was actually Cassius Clay Cassius X until Elijah Muhammad gave him the name Muhammad Ali. In this case, this is really Jimmy Butler, as usual, marching to the beat of his own drum. You know, he is an original person. He sort of invented himself. He's always stood out, Jimmy Butler. Even early on in his career, not highly touted, known as a defensive stopper, then a defensive stopper that was getting big minutes. Then all of a sudden, a guy who could score, not just a defensive stopper, but he could score too. Then all of a sudden, wait, he can score more than 20 points a game? Then, oh, wait a minute, he's an all-star? And then, could Jimmy Butler be the best player on a championship team? That's where we are now. So he has never been confined by the expectations of others, obviously. And he's never allowed that to define him or to limit him, it seems to me, in any way. And here, again, he's presented with all these choices. but his decision is, you know what? How about none of these choices? He's not confined by the choices of others, and he's thinking, well, how about this instead? It's an interesting idea. It doesn't surprise me that it was Jimmy Butler, Stephen A., who came up with it.
I agree. I mean, you got to give credit where credit is due in that regard, and especially when you hear the intent of his message. And that's what it's really, really about. You're trying not to be too aggressive, too abrasive, even though we're living in a time where certainly white America is listening. They've recognized the fact that they haven't been listening. All of a sudden, racism, racial oppression, racial inequality is at the forefront of our minds and our tongues, not just from our community, but even from the white community itself. The bottom line is when you as an African American in this nation, particularly if you're a multi-millionaire basketball player, if you're really about the business of being progressive and moving forward, you want to make noise, but not to the point where you elevate the level of alienization that'll kick in because people are so turned off by how you're approaching them. You want to make sure they hear you and they're willing to listen, and you want to incentivize them to help you and help our community move forward. And I think that Jimmy Butler was trying to do that in this particular situation, and I applaud him for doing so.